Stop overthinking. Not because thinking is bad, but because overthinking is what keeps you stuck. We've been taught that more thinking leads to better decisions. But what if I told you that most of the time, it actually leads to fear, to hesitation, to missed success opportunities? You see, winning in life isn't about having perfect clarity. It's about having the courage to move forward even when things are uncertain. Overthinkers wait. Winners act. Overthinkers search for guarantees. Winners create momentum. And here's the truth: no amount of thinking will remove uncertainty. But action. Action builds confidence. Action creates clarity. So the question isn't, what if I fail? The real question is, what if you never start? Because the people who win aren't the ones who think the most. They're the ones who decide and then move. Today, we're going to break that cycle. Today, you stop overthinking and start winning. Overthinking is fear disguised as logic. It feels smart. It feels responsible. It feels like you're being careful, thoughtful, even strategic. You tell yourself you're just analyzing the situation, weighing the pros and cons, making sure you don't make a mistake. But if you're honest, most of that thinking isn't moving you forward. It's holding you in place. Fear rarely shows up and announces itself clearly. It doesn't say, "I'm afraid." Instead, it puts on a mask. It sounds like logic. It sounds like reason. It sounds like preparation. You start asking yourself endless questions. What if this goes wrong? What if I'm not ready? What if people judge me? What if I fail? And suddenly, what looks like deep thinking is actually just fear looping in your mind. The problem is that overthinking gives you the illusion of control. It makes you feel like you're doing something productive, when in reality, you're just delaying action. You convince yourself that you'll act once you've figured everything out. But there's always something else to figure out. Another angle to consider. Another risk to analyze. Another doubt to entertain. So you stay stuck, not because you lack ability, but because fear has convinced you that you're not ready yet. Logic is supposed to guide you forward. Real logic simplifies decisions. It helps you focus on what matters and take the next step. But when fear takes over, logic becomes complicated. It creates confusion instead of clarity. It magnifies risks and minimizes opportunities. It turns simple decisions into overwhelming problems. Think about the times you've hesitated the most. Chances are, it wasn't because the decision was impossible. It was because you were afraid of the outcome. Afraid of making the wrong choice. Afraid of stepping into the unknown. And instead of acknowledging that fear, you disguised it as thinking. There's a difference between thinking and overthinking. Thinking leads to decisions. Overthinking delays them. Thinking is purposeful and time-bound. Overthinking is repetitive and endless. Thinking gives you direction. Overthinking drains your energy. The more you overthink, the more power you give to fear. Every doubt you entertain grows stronger. Every what if becomes more convincing. And before you know it, you've built a mental barrier so strong that taking even a small step feels impossible. But here's what's important to understand: fear thrives in stillness. It grows when you stay in your head. It gets louder the longer you wait. And the only way to break that cycle isn't by thinking more. It's by recognizing that what feels like logic might actually be fear trying to protect you from discomfort, from risk, from growth. Clarity comes from action, not thinking. It sounds counterintuitive because we've been taught to think first, act later, plan everything, analyze every possibility. Make sure the path is clear before you take the first step. But in real life, clarity rarely shows up before action. It reveals itself because of action. When you stay in your head, everything feels uncertain. Every option looks complicated. Every path seems risky. The more you think, the more variables you discover, and the more overwhelmed you become. You start believing that you need more information, more time, more preparation. But what you actually need is movement. Action has a way of cutting through confusion. The moment you do something, anything, you begin to see things differently. What once felt overwhelming starts to become manageable. What once felt unclear starts to take shape. Not because you figured it all out in your mind, but because you engaged with reality. Thinking is based on assumptions. Action is based on experience, and assumptions can be misleading. They are often influenced by fear, doubt, and past failures. You imagine worst-case scenarios. You predict outcomes that haven't happened. You convince yourself that something won't work before you've even tried it. But when you take action, you replace imagination with evidence. Even small actions create clarity. You don't need to take a massive leap. You don't need to have everything figured out. A simple step forward is enough to change your perspective. It gives you feedback. It shows you what works and what doesn't. It helps you adjust your direction. And that's how real progress happens, not through perfect planning, but through continuous movement. People often wait for the right moment to start. They believe that one day they'll feel ready. That one day everything will make sense. But readiness is a myth. No one feels completely ready before they begin. Clarity is not a prerequisite for action, it is a result of it. If you look at successful people, they didn't start with perfect clarity. They started with a decision, a willingness to move forward despite uncertainty. They learned along the way. They made mistakes, they adapted. And through that process, their path became clearer. Overthinking, on the other hand, creates paralysis. It traps you in a loop where you're constantly preparing but never progressing. You gather information, but you don't use it. You make plans, but you don't execute them. And over time, that inaction creates frustration. You start to doubt yourself, not because you're incapable, but because you're not moving. Action builds confidence, and confidence brings clarity. When you take steps forward, you prove to yourself that you can handle challenges. You begin to trust your ability to figure things out. That trust reduces fear, and with less fear, your mind becomes clearer. There's also something powerful about momentum. Once you start moving, it becomes easier to keep going. Each action leads to another. Each step reveals the next one. You don't need to see the entire path, you just need to see the next step. And that step only becomes visible when you take the one before it. Waiting for clarity before acting is like waiting for the fog to disappear while standing still. But when you move, the path begins to reveal itself. You start noticing opportunities you couldn't see before. You gain insights you couldn't have predicted. You discover strengths you didn't know you had. Perfectionism often disguises itself as a desire for clarity. You want everything to be right before you begin. You want to avoid mistakes, but mistakes are part of the process. They are not signs of failure, they are sources of information. They teach you what doesn't work so you can move closer to what does. Action also forces you to focus on what matters. When you're thinking, it's easy to get lost in irrelevant details. You overanalyze things that don't make a difference. But when you act, you quickly realize what's important and what's not. You prioritize better. You simplify your approach. It's important to understand that clarity is not a one-time event. It's not something you achieve and then have forever. It's something that evolves as you move forward. Each stage of your journey brings new challenges, new questions, and new insights. And each time, action is what moves you through that uncertainty. You don't need a perfect plan to start. You need a direction. You need a reason. And most importantly, you need the willingness to take that first step. Because once you do, things begin to change. Not all at once, not perfectly, but enough to keep you moving. The longer you wait, the harder it becomes. Not because the task gets more difficult, but because your mind builds it up. It turns simple actions into complex problems. It exaggerates risks and minimizes your ability to handle them. And the only way to break that cycle is to interrupt it with action. Clarity is not found in endless thinking. It's discovered in the process of doing. It's shaped by experience, refined by feedback, and strengthened by persistence. And the more you act, the clearer your path becomes. Progress beats perfection every time. Perfection is an idea. It's a standard you imagine in your head, something flawless, complete, without mistakes. And on the surface, it sounds like a good goal. Who wouldn't want things to be perfect? But the problem is, perfection doesn't exist in the real world. It exists in your mind. It, because of that, becomes a moving target. No matter how much you improve, it never feels like enough. When you chase perfection, you delay action. You wait until everything is just right. You keep refining, adjusting, and overthinking. You tell yourself you're improving the work, but often you're just avoiding the discomfort of putting it out there. Because once you act, once you show your work, once you take that step, you open yourself up to judgment, to failure, to the possibility that it won't meet your expectations. So you stay in preparation mode. You plan more. You tweak more. You think more. And while you're doing all of that, nothing is actually moving forward. Days pass. Opportunities pass. And what could have been progress turns into delay. Progress works differently. Progress is not about being perfect. It's about being better than you were yesterday. It's about taking one step, learning from it, and then taking another. It's imperfect by nature. It includes mistakes, setbacks, and adjustments. But that's exactly why it works, because it's real. When you focus on progress, you give yourself permission to start before you feel ready. You accept that the first version won't be your best. You understand that improvement comes through repetition, not hesitation. And because of that, you move faster, you learn faster, you grow faster. Perfection creates pressure. Progress creates momentum. When you're trying to be perfect, every step feels heavy. Every decision feels critical. You overanalyze small details because you're afraid they might ruin the outcome. But when you focus on progress, you reduce that pressure. You allow yourself to experiment. You allow yourself to fail and adjust. Think about any skill you've ever developed. You didn't start perfectly. You started messy. You made mistakes. You learned through doing. And over time, you improved. That improvement didn't come from waiting until you were perfect. It came from consistent effort. Perfectionism often hides insecurity. It's the fear of not being good enough, the fear of being judged, the fear of failing publicly. So instead of taking action, you try to eliminate all risk. You try to control every variable. But in doing so, you also eliminate growth. Progress, on the other hand, requires courage. It requires you to step forward even when things aren't ideal. It requires you to accept that mistakes are part of the process. And most importantly, it requires you to keep going even when things don't go as planned. There's also a practical side to this. The world rewards action, not intention. It doesn't matter how perfect your idea is if it never leaves your mind. It doesn't matter how detailed your plan is if you never execute it. What matters is what you do, not what you intend to do. When you prioritize progress, you create a feedback loop. You take action, you get results. You learn from those results, and then you improve. That cycle continues, and with each iteration, you get closer to your goal. It's not a straight line. It's a process of refinement. Perfectionism breaks that loop. It keeps you stuck at the starting point, constantly preparing, but never executing. And without execution, there's no feedback. Without feedback, there's no improvement. Another challenge with perfection is that it often leads to burnout. You set unrealistic standards for yourself. You expect everything to be flawless. And when it's not, you feel frustrated. You feel like you're falling short. That frustration drains your energy and motivation. Progress is sustainable. It allows you to pace yourself. It allows you to celebrate small wins. It keeps you engaged because you can see movement, even if it's slow. And that sense of movement is what keeps you going. It's also important to understand that what you consider perfect today will change tomorrow. As you grow, your standards evolve. What once seemed perfect will no longer meet your expectations. So if you wait for perfection before you act, you'll always be waiting. Progress accepts that growth is ongoing. It doesn't try to reach a final, flawless state. It focuses on continuous improvement. It embraces the idea that there's always another level, another lesson, another step forward. In many cases, taking imperfect action will teach you more than months of planning ever could. You gain real-world experience. You encounter real challenges. You develop real solutions. And those experiences shape your understanding in a way that thinking alone cannot. Perfection might look appealing, but it's limiting. It keeps you in your comfort zone. It convinces you to wait. Progress pushes you forward. It challenges you to act. It forces you to engage with reality. And once you shift your mindset from perfection to progress, everything changes. You stop waiting for the perfect moment. You stop worrying about every small detail. You start focusing on what you can do now with what you have. You start moving, learning, adapting, and improving continuously. Confidence is built by doing, not waiting. It's easy to believe that confidence comes first, that you need to feel ready, certain, and sure of yourself before you take action. But in reality, it works the other way around. Confidence is not the starting point. It's the result. When you wait to feel confident before you act, you create a loop that keeps you stuck. You tell yourself, I'll start when I feel ready. But readiness never fully arrives. Doubt stays, fear stays, uncertainty stays. So you wait longer, thinking more time will fix it. But time alone doesn't build confidence. Action does. Confidence is evidence-based. It grows when you prove to yourself that you can do something. Even small wins matter. When you take a step and see that you didn't fail the way you imagined, your belief in yourself increases. When you face a challenge and handle it, even imperfectly, you begin to trust your ability. That trust is the foundation of confidence. At the beginning, everything feels uncomfortable. You question yourself. You hesitate. You worry about what could go wrong. That's normal. It doesn't mean you're incapable. It means you're stepping outside your comfort zone, and growth only happens there. Most people underestimate how much their confidence depends on experience. They look at others who seem confident and assume they were born that way. But what they're really seeing is the result of repetition. The result of trying, failing, adjusting, and trying again. Behind every confident person is a series of actions that built that confidence over time. Waiting, on the other hand, weakens confidence. The longer you delay action, the bigger the task feels in your mind. You start to overestimate the difficulty and underestimate your ability. You imagine worst-case scenarios. You convince yourself that you're not ready, and that belief becomes stronger the longer you stay inactive. Action interrupts that pattern. It gives you real data instead of imagined fears. You realize that most of the things you were worried about either don't happen or aren't as bad as you thought. You learn that you can adapt. You learn that you can recover. And each time you do, your confidence grows. There's also a psychological shift that happens when you act. You move from being a spectator to being a participant. Instead of watching life and thinking about what you could do, you start engaging with it. That shift changes how you see yourself. You no longer see yourself as someone who might be capable. You start to see yourself as someone who is doing. Confidence doesn't require perfection. It doesn't mean you won't feel nervous or uncertain. Even confident people feel those things. The difference is that they don't let those feelings stop them. They've built enough trust in themselves to move forward anyway. One of the biggest misconceptions is that confidence eliminates fear. It doesn't. Fear can still be present. What confidence does is reduce the power of that fear. It gives you the ability to act despite it. And that ability comes from experience, not from waiting. Every time you take action, you expand your comfort zone. What once felt difficult becomes familiar. What once felt intimidating becomes manageable. And as your comfort zone grows, so does your confidence. But that expansion only happens through doing. If you look back at your own life, you'll see this pattern. There were things you once found difficult or intimidating that now feel easy. That change didn't happen because you waited until you felt confident. It happened because you did them repeatedly until they became natural. Another important aspect is resilience. Confidence is not just about believing you'll succeed. It's also about believing you can handle failure. And that belief only develops when you experience setbacks and realize you can recover from them. Waiting protects you from failure, but it also prevents you from building resilience. Doing exposes you to challenges, but it also strengthens you. It teaches you how to adapt, how to solve problems, how to keep going. And those skills reinforce your confidence because you know you can handle whatever comes next. It's also worth noting that confidence compounds. The more you act, the more confident you become. And the more confident you become, the easier it is to take further action. That creates a positive cycle. But the first step is always the hardest because you're starting without that built-up confidence. That's why it's important to focus on small actions. You don't need to make a huge leap. You just need to start. One step is enough to begin building that evidence. One action is enough to challenge your doubts. And from there, you keep going. Waiting feels safe, but it comes at a cost. It keeps you in a state of uncertainty. It keeps your confidence low because you're not giving yourself the chance to grow. It keeps you dependent on a feeling that may never fully arrive. Doing, even when it's uncomfortable, changes everything. It shifts your mindset. It builds your experience. It strengthens your belief in yourself. And over time, that belief becomes confidence. You don't need certainty to start. Yet most people spend their lives waiting for it. Waiting for the right moment, the perfect plan, the guarantee that things will work out. They believe that before they take action, they must eliminate doubt, remove risk, and fully understand every possible outcome. But certainty is not something you achieve before you begin. It's something you develop along the way. The need for certainty comes from a desire to feel safe. Your mind is wired to protect you. It wants to avoid mistakes, avoid failure, avoid anything that could lead to discomfort. So it pushes you to seek answers, to analyze situations, to predict outcomes. And while that can be useful in some cases, it becomes limiting when it stops you from moving forward. Because the truth is, no meaningful goal comes with certainty. Every path worth taking includes unknowns. There will always be variables you can't control, outcomes you can't predict, and challenges you can't fully prepare for. If you wait until everything is certain, you will never start. Uncertainty is not a sign that you're unprepared. It's a sign that you're stepping into something new. And anything new will feel unclear at the beginning. That doesn't mean you shouldn't pursue it. It means you're in the early stage of the process. Think about any major decision in life. Starting a business, changing careers, pursuing a passion, even making personal changes. None of these come with guarantees. There is always risk involved. There is always a chance things won't go as planned. But there is also a chance that things will work out better than you imagined, and you can't discover that possibility without taking action. Waiting for certainty creates a false sense of control. It makes you feel like you're being responsible, like you're making a smart decision. But in many cases, it's just fear holding you back. Fear of making the wrong choice, fear of failure, fear of stepping into the unknown. The problem with waiting is that uncertainty doesn't disappear with time. If anything, it often increases. The longer you think, the more scenarios you imagine. The more doubts you create, the more complicated the situation becomes. And what started as a simple decision turns into something overwhelming. Action changes that. When you take a step forward, even a small one, you begin to replace uncertainty with experience. You gain information that you couldn't have accessed through thinking alone. You learn what works and what doesn't. You start to understand the reality of the situation instead of relying on assumptions. Certainty is built through evidence, and evidence comes from doing. Every action you take reduces some level of uncertainty. It gives you clarity, direction, and insight. But that process only begins when you're willing to move without having all the answers. There's also a difference between being reckless and being willing to act without certainty. Acting without certainty doesn't mean ignoring risks or avoiding preparation. It means accepting that you can't eliminate all risk. It means being prepared enough to start and then learning as you go. Many people overestimate how much they need to know before they begin. They think they need a complete plan, full knowledge, and perfect timing. But most successful journeys start with incomplete information. The plan evolves. The strategy adjusts. The path becomes clear with each step. If you look at people who achieve great things, they don't wait for certainty. They move forward with belief. Not blind belief, but a willingness to figure things out along the way. They trust their ability to adapt. They understand that they don't need all the answers at the beginning. Another reason people seek certainty is the fear of regret. They worry about making the wrong decision and facing negative consequences. But in many cases, the bigger regret comes from not acting at all, from wondering what could have happened if they had taken that step. Uncertainty is uncomfortable, but it's also where growth happens. It forces you to think differently, to solve problems, to develop new skills. It challenges you to expand beyond your current limits. And through that process, you become more capable. When you accept that certainty is not required, you free yourself from the need to have everything figured out. You shift your focus from, what if this doesn't work, to, what can I learn from this? That shift changes how you approach challenges. It makes you more open, more adaptable, more resilient. It's also important to recognize that certainty is often an illusion. Even when you feel sure about something, there are still unknowns. Life is unpredictable. Circumstances change. New challenges arise. So waiting for certainty doesn't actually protect you from risk. It just delays your progress. Starting without certainty requires courage. It requires you to step forward despite doubt. It requires you to trust that you will handle whatever comes your way. And that trust is built through experience, not through waiting. Every step you take strengthens that trust. Every challenge you face and overcome increases your confidence. And over time, what once felt uncertain becomes familiar. But that transformation only happens if you're willing to begin without having everything figured out